Drugs are all around our society. People use stimulants like caffeine to stay focused on their work. They might have a beer or two after a long workday, or they might smoke a cigarette to put some stress off their shoulders. These substances are legal in most countries, even despite their obvious negative effect. Just to name a few. Since politicians have already realized that making them illegal wouldn't help with decreasing their use. The question is, when are they going to realize that it works this way with all the other drugs? If you want to find out why legalizing all drugs is a good idea, watch till the end of the video. We're going to touch on all the important arguments for making drugs legal and illegal. But first, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Legalizing dangerous substances doesn't seem like such a great idea at first glance, because buying a pack of smack in your neighborhood doesn't sound very healthy for anyone. Admittedly, these substances would be easier to get your hands on, but that's not the point at all. The argument for legalizing things like heroin is to provide addicts with a drug that they can rely on. This might sound counterproductive, but let me explain. Street drugs are usually cut with many chemicals, most commonly in drugs that are made using chemical procedures. The sole reason for this is dealers making more money for the drugs they sell. This is sadly the cause for many of the fatal overdoses that happen daily around the world. The solution for this problem would be to provide addicts with clean drugs, so they know what they're getting every single time. Meaning they can adjust their doses more responsibly, and ultimately, the chances of overdose are significantly lower. The idea of living in a state where all drugs are legal is still somewhat scary for many parents, which makes sense, but in a controlled environment, these drugs would be much harder to get by than in the current situation. If you want to get illegal drugs, and it doesn't really matter which ones, you just have to know one friend who knows another friend, and he will probably get you what you need. Or alternatively, you could visit a nightclub and get your desired product there. The point is that getting illegal drugs is much simpler than getting legal ones when it comes to teenagers. Yes, you might find a liquor store with a person that's willing to sell these. However, he knows he would face serious trouble if he got caught. For black market dealers, they don't care about such things and will happily sell to you anytime. The legalization itself would surely have to be accompanied with health campaigns and crucial information about addiction. In the state of today's society, people generally still don't know about the possible benefits or risks of these substances, especially when it comes to older generations. Many of them have sadly been brainwashed by the past political regimes, which have dehumanized and demonized most drugs altogether.
You know, we used to have so much fun together.
And now?
This is what we do.
John Ehrlichman, who was one of President Richard Nixon's assistants in the United States, told the public about their previous war on drugs campaign. You want to know what the war on drugs was really all about? The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black people, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Had it not been for the war on drugs initiated in the United States, we might have had legal marijuana today, and it wouldn't have to wait for tens of years in order to conduct studies about the possible benefits of it. This brings us to the next point, healthcare. We already know that substances like LSD, psilocybin mushrooms, ketamine, and even marijuana can be extremely useful in treating depression, psychotic symptoms, and psychological disorders like PTSD. I'm not going to talk about this in depth. However, if you'd like to see how exactly these psychedelics or cannabinoids affect your brain, leave me a comment down below. One of the biggest misconceptions I wanted to touch on is the idea that if certain drugs are made illegal, the amount of users will go down. The only thing this will do is encourage people to buy from the black market, which, as of today, exists on the internet. So you can basically buy anything from anywhere in the world. People are gonna get drugs that aren't safe, they might contain questionable and often dangerous other chemicals, and the black market in the local area and in general is gonna grow even bigger. No amount of police enforcement can stop this. The only logical way of fighting with the black market is legalization. We often see people talk about decriminalization, and while that's also a great option, it's only the first step when it comes to resolving the war on drugs. At the end of the day, we need to provide addicts with reasonable information about their use, and one way we can do that is give them the drugs ourselves. That way, they would visit health centers where these drugs would be distributed. And their motivation for doing that, they would get clean drugs and needles, as well as anything they might need in order to combat their addiction. This all sounds great, but how do we know that it's gonna actually work? A great example of a successful attempt at decriminalizing illegal drugs is Portugal. In 2001, they decriminalized all illegal drugs, which helped their case tremendously. They no longer view drug possession and consumption as criminal offense, but rather a chronic disease, which can be treated with proper care, such as therapy. As of today, they are likely the most liberal country in Europe when it comes to drug addiction and drug use. They were among the first ones to realize that making drugs illegal doesn't nullify the underlying factors as to why people even get addicted in the first place. They also managed to save an enormous amount of money, which they previously used to fight the black market and drug dealers. Now, they can put that money to good use by building health centers for addicts and provide more therapeutical help. If they at some point decide to legalize these drugs, they would have even more money from taxing and selling them. Drug addiction is a problem that we must act upon, not in the traditional sense of prohibition, but rather acknowledging that the problem exists and trying to fix the underlying issues. Sometimes it can be early childhood trauma, sometimes it's harsh family conditions, or it could be the loss of a loved one, anything. These people require individual help, which means that if we could stop stigmatizing addicts and painting them as helpless people that are just going through life without guidance, it would change everything. Lastly, I think that people should have the right to indulge in any substance they want to. I mean, adult people, obviously. Even if it leads to addiction, we cannot possibly stand behind every person's back and prohibiting everything that doesn't, in our mind, create any value. If something as destructive as alcohol and tobacco is legal, what makes us think we would be worse off with other legal drugs if people were properly informed about the risks? The statistics don't lie. If the words life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness don't include the right to experiment with your own consciousness, then the Declaration of Independence isn't worth the hemp it was written on. Terence McKenna. Thank you guys for watching the video. If you want to see more, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss on any future uploads.